I must admit, it took me a bit of a while to get around to watching Devil Wears Prada 2, not because I wasn't a fan of the first movie. I was, still am, big fan. It's one of my comfort films. I've seen it so many times I can quote large swaths of it to calm myself down when the world feels a bit overwhelming. What can I say? Miranda Priestley gives me the confidence I need to not slouch and to get my shit together. I love it. I love her. And yet, it took me a bit of a while to go see Devil Wears Prada 2 because a large portion of the internet were up in arms upon its release, complaining about the changes that Miranda's characterization went through, which I will admit worried me a lot because, like I said earlier, I'm a big fan of Devil Wears Prada's Miranda Priestley, but I also got the complaint about Andy basically feeling the same way she had back in part one, when part two was set 2 decades after the end of the first film. And that was also worrying to me. So I stepped into the theaters with worries galore, bracing myself for what I had convinced myself was going to be a slog of 2 hours of runtime due to me having listened to the internet's wails and let that color my expectations of what I was about to watch. And whilst I can see why some fans and moviegoers reacted the way they did, I will rather like to posit the suggestion that the reason why The Devil Wears Prada 2 feels the way it does, the reason why it seems like some characters stayed the same whilst others seem to drastically be different is because of that dreaded word, redundancy. Which, of course, is the reason why I think the movie started by addressing that right at the bat in order to situate the timeline and have us, as the audience, be aware that things are drastically different 2 decades later. Andy, whose dream has always been to be a journalist who chases stories and whose writings matter in a way that is transformative to the world she lives in, has been able to do so. She's gained prestige, and as the movie shifts to her, we see that she's done so well for herself that she's even being recognized by her peers with her nomination and eventual win of a journalism award. One could say that at this point, Andy has reached her career peak. And so it is what makes the message that her team and the rest of the reporters who work together with her hit so much harder. That at the height of her reward for a job well done, she and the rest of her colleagues are fired for redundancy purposes. The conglomerate that owns the paper has decided that the reporters and the inclusive have no value to the bottom line and are thus being tossed out. And that is the premise that drives the rest of the movie and sees these characters change or remain the same as a result of that. It is the point of connection for the lot of them. Andy, who reached the pinnacle of what she's dreamed of, and yet at the end of the day was still treated as someone with little value. And Miranda, who finds herself in the exact same position where she's desperate to finally get the recognition she's worked towards, recognition that would see her gain a position that she's earned with her decades of experience and work, only for her to once again fall under that very same threat of redundancy. I think that for a lot of viewers who perceive Andy as having zero growth because she reverts back to the same person she had been back in the first movie, seem to be ignoring that part of her characterization for this film. Yes, she's successful and had made a name for herself and developed the skills to back it up by the time she comes back to Runway as the features editor. But she's also coming off of the roller coaster that was her moments prior, being thought to be useless and therefore not worth keeping at her old job. And so I find myself able to excuse the excessive exuberance with which she turns up at Runway because I'm sorry. Unless you've been fired before, you really don't understand the sheer relief that turns you into an excitable teenager slash someone in your early 20s when you get that break that once again means that you've been gainfully employed, especially when you believe that it's with a previous employer who you think got you back because they value you and can see what changes you might be able to bring. Of course, we know that this decision was permanently Irv's and Miranda had no idea. Matter of fact, whilst the hiring decision helped Andy to see that someone out there recognizes her capability and values her as a result of that, for Miranda, the opposite is the case. It instead highlights out yet again another way in which her employer, Irv, doesn't think she's capable of hiring the best hands for the job. It's a direct, overt questioning of her abilities and a hint that she's not necessary for that process. Andy, who realizes this when it hits her that Miranda had no say in her hiring, does a bit of a backtrack. She's still excited at the prospect of having a job, and she's once again caught in the thrall that is Miranda Priestley. And thus, we see that play out throughout the film. And to be fair, it kind of makes sense. Miranda was a port for Andy in her storm, in her journey towards her finding her journalistic voice. And so she relates to her in that way. It's very hard to break the idolization one would have towards someone so monumental towards her growth. So, whilst some viewers might find Andy's reactions and her desperation for Miranda's approval unrealistic given the time, it made sense for and to me. I have had instances when I've run into mentors I had back when I was just starting in the workforce, and I revert back to the 21-year-old I was back when I first met them. Because I do have the professional and life experience befitting someone with over a decade's experience working. But in the same vein, my old mentors have kept growing as well. They've kept becoming even more impressive than when I'd last seen them. And that is how human life works. Growth is something that applies to us all. But back to Andy. If we agree that it's her redundancy that brought her to Runway, then of course it makes narrative sense that it is this fear of being sent right back to square one, of being seen as having little value and being let go of, that has her running to Emily with the hope that with Emily's help and the billionaire that Emily is hooked up with, they would be able to save Runway, thus save her job and Miranda as well. Which is why it hits extra hard when the truth is revealed that Emily's plan is to take over Runway and cast Miranda aside. Now, is this tied to the fact that Emily herself is obsessed with proving herself worthy of having enough value to be seen as Miranda's replacement considering her treatment? Yes. And yet at the same time, it is sad because her value is tied to a relationship with Benji, her boyfriend. Without him, she loses that, which is also why the end of the movie has her instituting a friendship with Andy after admitting that she and Benji are through. One could say that Benji lost his value to her when he was unable to help her gain the editor in chief position as a result of his failed acquisition of Runway. And she, in turn, lost her value to him since technically, if we think back on the implosion of his marriage to Lucy Liu's Sasha, one can deduce that Benji is the stereotypical billionaire with his heart set on upgrading his partners when the old ones step out of his reach or need for him. And then there is Miranda. Now, I have seen a lot of think pieces about Miranda Priestley having lost her teeth in the sequel. And if we're being honest, I can agree with that. Miranda was way more vicious, more acerbic, more forceful in the first movie. And a lot of us who love said movie loved that version of Miranda Priestley. And so her change in the sequel is very telling. And yet at the same time, it works for me, narratively speaking. Miranda, as we meet her in the first movie, is at the height of her influence. Runway is positioned as being the highest arbiter of taste. She had power, and so her behavior thus reflected that. There was no one to check her because she stood at the pinnacle of what could be in the first movie. The sequel, on the other hand, is showing a world much changed, kind of like the one we're currently living in. Like Nigel tells Andy, the era of Prince being at the top is gone. Now, Runway has to compete actively with fashion influencers. It reminds me of a tweet I'd seen floating around on Twitter about how everyone with a microphone now considers themselves an expert. I can just imagine Miranda stumbling upon that tweet for some reason and immediately hitting like and retweet because she agrees with that. The rapid change in the landscape of this job that she'd sacrificed her life, her youth, her first marriage to, that she's built reputability and experience in, has meant that the Miranda Priestley is becoming a relic of times gone by, one made redundant with every change in the industry, and the change in her persona reflects that. I mean, the movie starts with her being cancelled for having unwittingly published an editorial piece about a fashion house she had no idea at the time had employed sweatshop labor. And she was called out for that, so much so that her boss hired a former subordinate to take over that role without even consulting her on it. The presence of the Viscountess Bridgerton Sorry, I meant Amari, was written in for comedic effect, yes, but it's also meant to be a reflection of a change in HR where Miranda's previous draconian ways isn't allowed to flourish anymore. Now she has to handle her own coats and cannot verbally eviscerate her staff willy nilly as she used to. We get a Miranda Priestley who is constantly biting her tongue. And I know the knee jerk reaction is to say that the movie was playing to its audience and Miranda as a character suffered for it. But honestly, the change makes sense for her story. The entirety of The Devil Wears Prada 2 sees Miranda on tenterhooks. For the first time in her professional career since we've met her, really, she's desperate. There's a very high chance of her being named the global head of content at Elias Clark, the parent company that owns Runway, and so it adds to the pressure underneath which she's operating. Yes, she's on a higher level than Andy and the rest of her staff, but Miranda, like everyone else, has someone she answers to, and she too has to operate under the fear of being made redundant. And so, whilst it might seem silly that she keeps having to police herself, it's important that we remember that she's doing so because the alternative is to be marked as being worth way too much trouble than the value she can bring. And what would result at the end of that is her being let go or demoted. Two things that Miranda Priestley, with her pride, cannot abide. She can bite her tongue if she's forced to do so, but it's a price we see her willing to pay, even as much as it grates on her nerves and irks her to do so. But if that is what she has to do to endure in order so she can get what she wants and increase her professional value, then that is something that she's willing to live with. Miranda Priestley, like the rest of us common folk, has her own fears, and the sequel highlights that brilliantly well. And for those that are about to argue that point, please remember even Nigel has to tell Andy that Runway has fallen so far from its prestigious position now that they have to resort to making short form content and clickbait titles so they can keep the advertisers happy, since happy advertisers means that they get to retain their jobs. It is why Emily was able to force their hands into writing a puff piece for Dior. The power has been cemented in the hands of the oligarch that control their industry. And so Miranda becomes the person who finds herself trying to discuss art and beauty and its relevance with a Benji who is so far removed and disinterested in it. Because in Benji's own mind, the future is one that is automated and doesn't need actual people like Miranda. It's the ultimate stance on a world that is fast approaching redundancy for most humans. And that is what then shocks Miranda after a conversation with her husband about what her idealized version of a future would look like. It's what gives her the push to get back into fighting to ensure that she and others like her get to stay relevant against a system that would see them lose their value otherwise. That is what Andy joins her in fighting for, and they are able to successfully pull it off thanks to Sasha agreeing to purchase the entirety of Elias Clark from underneath Benji's unsuspecting eyes. Now, I know that that bit was written to be a happy ending, and I want to accept that, but there still remains a part of me who is tentatively happy, yes, but who also recognizes that ultimately the power still doesn't reside in the hands of Miranda and Andy, even though both of them are in the positions that they desire and want. Instead, it is still in the hands of those with money who control their lives according to their whims and caprices. Sasha is good today, but who knows if she would remain so? Who knows if she would remain the majority shareholder of Elias Clark? Who knows if someone else might not come down the line later on in the future? And once again, Miranda and Andy and Nigel will be stuck struggling for a way to avoid losing their relevancy. I know it sounds like I'm a bit of a Debbie Downer, but it's something that is worth thinking about and considering. The world as it exists is one that we can be made redundant within the blink of an eye. One minute you're soaring, and the next you and your work have been declared useless, and you're stuck trying to pick up the pieces again. As much as I enjoyed The Devil Wears Prada 2 for the nostalgia it gave me, that bit of its story is what resonated with me the most and why I will be rewatching this particular sequel for many more years to come. But of course, these are all just my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Whether or not you agree with me, please share them in the comments. Like this video, however, if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet, but enjoyed anything of what I had to say, share it so others can find my channel as well. Or you can check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might be interested in. I have them both linked in the description bar. I will see you on Monday with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.